All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to the Holler. tnholler.com is where you can find us at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook. We also have Hollers hollering all across the state thanks to your support. Your chipping in monthly really keeps us going. It really does help. And before we get started here, I just want to send a shout out to a few of our extra special sponsors. If you're buying or selling a home in Middle Tennessee, do it through Elisa Parker. She really helps us out. If you need a lawyer, and Abby Rubenfeld is who you need. And then if you need any jewelry, AJ Martin is not your grandmother's jewelry store. All right. Thank you to them for supporting us, for chipping in, and for helping us continue to let people know what's going on here in Tennessee, where, as our guest today just pointed out, we may or may not be a democracy anymore. So I think hopefully if you follow us by now, you've seen the article in the Atlantic. We just flashed the headline. Here it is again, in which Ann Applebaum, who you should be following on Twitter at her name, asks, is Tennessee a democracy? And Ann is here with us today. Ann, how are you today?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. It's really a pleasure. Big fan of your work, and I was really excited to hear that you were actually writing this article. If anybody has read it, they'll see that I actually spoke to Ann as she was writing this article. We met for coffee in Nashville to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to our hearts here at the Holler, because it's something that we have been trying to sound the alarm about basically ever since we started in 2019. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that this is a question they need to be asking. So, Ann, I guess I want to start by asking you, what made you decide to write this article, and how did you decide to focus on Tennessee?
So it was a little bit serendipitous. I've, as you know, and maybe others know, I've lived on and off for the last 20 years in Poland, and I spent a lot of time traveling in Central Europe. I work a lot on Russia. I write a lot about Ukraine. But I have this nagging sense that some of the things that I had seen happening in other democracies, in Poland, in Hungary, in Turkey, in Russia, although 15 years ago, were beginning to happen in the US. And of course, we can all see the grand drama, Trump, the White House, January the 6th. But I hear it's almost like, little dribs and drabs, people who've been here and there tell me things. You hear about Texas, you hear about Florida, those are the states that get a lot of national news. They're big swing states. But I also started to hear about North Carolina, about Tennessee, about Wyoming, and about the ways in which some state level institutions are beginning to look like the institutions that I know from Central Europe. The way in which, once you have a single party controlling everything, the executive, the legislature, and the courts, you begin to get strange things happening in politics. And I thought, let's pick Tennessee. Of course, I saw the story last April when 2 members of the legislature were kicked out under strange circumstances. I followed that story, and I thought, well, let's dig a little bit deeper. I understand Tennessee is part of the United States of America. The Bill of Rights applies there. You are very much part of our constitutional republic. People have freedom of speech and so on. But nevertheless, the ways in which, as I said, a single party being in control of all institutions over a long period of time begins to warp the way that people think even. Had begun to interest me. So before coming, I spent a lot of time talking to people. I made some contacts. I found you. I started following you, actually, and some other Tennessee publications, and decided to come down and see, just how much it was how much it was the same and how much it was different.
Well, I definitely want to hear from you, kind of if it met your expectations or what you found. But I just want to say, this is something that we've been talking about for a long time. And, it's not always Putin's Russia that takes you away from being a democracy. It's things like, voice votes in committees where I've seen the votes go one way, but because of a voice vote, the committee chair can just decide to call it another way. Or Gloria Johnson trying to talk on the House floor and being ignored for hours at a time, microphones being cut, voter suppression, the gerrymandering of Nashville. These are all things that you mentioned in your very good article that I think everybody should read on The Atlantic. I guess my question to you is, in the countries that you're referencing, is it the chipping away that happens first before we get to like the wholesale erasure of democracy? Is this similar to what you've seen in other places?
We have this idea that if there's a coup d'état and democracy ends, that there's some big dramatic moment, right? I don't know. The lieutenant colonel goes into the presidential palace and shoots at this into the ceiling, and then someone takes over the television station and they start playing, Swan Lake. I mean, that's our image of what a coup looks like. But in practice, most democracies, when they fall in stages, and it can be very, very gradual. It can be 1,000 cuts, famously once described as salami tactics. One of the things you're seeing, very interesting in Israel right now, where there's a similar kind of slow motion attack on the Israeli judiciary going on there. The Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, tried to do it all at once. He got a huge pushback. Now he's trying to do it piece by piece, and you're now seeing these big demonstrations on the street. And you see the Israelis talking about salami tactics, which was expression first used in Hungary, actually, after the Second World War, but has been used again most recently. And very often, some of the things that happen first don't seem like that big of a deal. So in Poland, one of the first attacks on the independence of the Polish judiciary came in the form of a law lowering the retirement age for judges. What's the big deal about that? I mean, a retirement age, we can argue should it be 65? Should it be 70? It doesn't seem like that doesn't sound like an assault on democracy to lower the retirement age, to make judges retire earlier, except when it means that dozens of judges will have to leave all at once. And then suddenly the ruling party gets the chance to appoint all of the new ones. And then appoints them from, among people whom it knows to be its political friends. So they're no longer judges who've come up through a normal court process. They're, literally friends of the prime minister or friends of the ruling party leader. And that can be an assault on democracy just as much as, the tanks in the streets and the lieutenant colonel shooting at the portrait of the president. And most democratic declines, and by the way, we've gotten used to thinking of this as a right-wing phenomenon, Poland, Hungary, Turkey, but it doesn't look that different in Venezuela. I was in Venezuela 3 years ago, right just before the pandemic, and I was really struck by how much of the history of Venezuela and the decline of democracy, and then later of economics, and almost everything else in Venezuela, which went from being one of the wealthiest country, I should say, in South America, to now being one of the poorest. It also began in a very similar way: attacks on judges, attacks on independent institutions, attacks on the media, the ruling party's control of various kinds of ombudsmen and other institutions that you don't think are important until they're gone. So this is a tried and true method. This is a known way to undermine people's trust in independent actors and independent judges, independent, not just journalists, but even anybody who has a nonpartisan voice. And it's and you can see the effects of it. The effects of it are that gradually the public loses trust. Gradually the public becomes more polarized. People have to choose sides between what feels like to them extremes. Politicians begin acting more and more like activists because, the normal institutional mechanisms for where politics normally happens has broken down. And then very slowly you get something that looks less and less democratic. And you can see that process happening in some American states.
Somebody just pointed out that I made a Freudian slip and wrote, "Is Tennessee a theocracy?" at the bottom of the banner. and I meant to write democracy, but in my mind, I always say we're a theocracy, and I just wrote it. So thank you, Tom Hanks. I'm assuming not the actor, for pointing that out. Tom Hanks is joining us today. Guessing it's not the Tom Hanks. Yeah, you mentioned the judiciary attack. Just recently, this supermajority, Republican supermajority, created a three-judge chancery court to hear especially challenges to their unconstitutional laws. Like they created an entirely new court with governorly appointees. So anytime somebody wants to say, "Oh, that's an unconstitutional law you just passed," it goes to their special court. They also created a state charter approval appeal board that if a local government doesn't want a charter school in their area, a local school board rejects it, they can just appeal to Governor Lee's rigged board. We've just seen Attorney General Skrmetti here is now going after corporations for their diversity practices and just now said basically that he and 18 other AGs want your info if you go out of state to get an abortion in the places where it's legal. So they have clearly targeted the judiciary and the laws as a way to exert their influence. These feel like abuses of power. And it seems like the guardrails are gone. Like, I don't know how you rein in this move to what I would call theocracy, fascism, dictatorship, whatever you want to call it. So I guess my question for you, Ann, would be, is Tennessee a democracy? What did you find when you came here? And like, how would you answer that question?
I mean, I can, it's a declining democracy. It is in effect a one-party system where, a single party is in control and isn't going to lose control. I mean, you don't really see the possibility for somebody else winning the next election. I mean, because it's a state and it's not its own country, there are some checks and balances. So you have federal courts, which can block Tennessee courts and which sometimes do, as you know. And people can come and go as they please in Tennessee. But it's not like you have shut borders. You also have, although this is very similar to other countries. I mean, you have islands of we call them blue cities or little democratic strongholds where people can make different kinds of rules, and they're not forbidden from doing that, at least so far. Although I have to say, I mean, the relationship between Nashville, the Nashville city government and the Tennessee state government is very reminiscent of the Budapest city government and its relationship to the Hungarian government. So this phenomenon of metropolitan areas having their own politics, which are different from the higher level politics, is one we know from a lot of other places. And that's now quite typical in a lot of American red states. I mean, you have Austin in Texas and Boise in Idaho and, Jackson Hole in Wyoming and some others. But in terms of what the state government controls, which is, as I say, not everything, you do see signs of, the minority having no rights, people having, even majority opinions. I mean, you have a majority in favor of various forms of gun control in Tennessee, and that majority opinion is no longer reflected in the state legislature. I mean,
it's not just gun control. I mean, it's gun control, it's Medicaid expansion, it's even our abortion laws, it's attitudes towards LGBT folks. Like, the majority rule is not here. And I think that's a really important point to make, is that so many of these policy positions are actually not favored by the majority, but that's not what's reflected in our government. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Right. No, but that's also very typical, because once the institutions are hijacked and once the voting system is gerrymandered or fixed or rigged, or I mean, it's different, it works differently in different places, so that the other side can't win. Then you begin to have this situation where politics become kind of like performance art. I mean, people act as if they're doing something on a stage when they're in the legislature, but they're not really reflecting what people think. And so the debate that happens on the floor of the House is not the same as the debate that happens, in the street. We have that problem at the national level to some extent in the US too, but it struck me that in Tennessee, you have this at a very high level. I mean, it, yourself, because you've done so much work taking clips, making short videos of, some of the stranger things that happen on the floor of the Tennessee legislature and showing them to people. And people look at them and laugh, or they say, well, that can't be right, or that's, that sounds very strange. Because the language being used by many politicians is so far away from real life, and that is a genuine sign of democratic decay.
Well, that is exactly what we try to do, and that's why when the Tennessee Three were, or when Justin and Justin were expelled, and the Tennessee Three were up for expulsion, and there was so much backlash to that. That was the world finding out what we've been trying to tell them for a long time. And anybody that had followed us up until that point was not surprised by what was happening. Was not surprised that it was those three that went and stood in the well. And so it's really important that they did what they did because it showed the world what's going on here. That's why I appreciate articles like the one you wrote, because it really does ask the right question and tell people what's going on. And I see our friend Gapper, who's here quite a bit, asking, is this more non-Tennesseans complaining about Tennessee? No, this is an observer who has been all over the world telling us what she sees here in Tennessee and has every right to do so. And this whole thing of, if you don't like, leave, I would say the same thing about, I think that's a really weak way to go at this. I prefer,
if I can just interrupt. I mean, I'm American, and Tennessee is America, so I feel
that's right.
I feel
that's
like I
right.
have taken what
we
happened.
all have the right to talk about this, and Tennessee hasn't changed is kind of turning a blind eye to what's going on here. I wanted to, just before I let you go here, talk about one last thing, which is the end of the article. You focused on a thing that I think it's really important to focus on, because I think it really sums up the attitude to this whole thing. You talked about this leaked tape that we posted about, where inside the Republican caucus, after Gloria Johnson was not expelled and the two Justins were, we got a leaked audio of Republicans arguing with each other because one of them, Jody Barrett, had decided not to vote to expel Gloria, and it made them look like the racists that they are, frankly. And one of the quotes that Sapicki said, which he's a Murray County representative, first of all, he said, Democrats are not our friends. They're going to destroy the republic. If the Tennessee falls, the republic falls. And then he said, you got to do what's right, even if you think it might be wrong. And I just wondered what your feeling was hearing that from Scott Sapicki, and why you chose to close your article with that, which I'm glad you did.
Yeah, so you drew my attention to those quotes, and what struck me about that was, here you have a political party that controls everything in Tennessee. I mean, all the institutions, this legislature, both houses, the governor's house, and so on. And yet they don't feel happy. They don't feel satisfied. They don't feel like they're winning. Any challenge, however small, even from three people shouting into megaphones on the well of the legislature, feels to them like an existential threat. And this is also, there is something about total power, or that doesn't, is very ultimately unsatisfying. So here, okay, they control everything, and yet stuff doesn't happen the way it's supposed to, and this is something we know from dictatorships, actually. I mean, I wrote books about the Soviet Union in the past, and I'm not making that direct comparison, but one of the things that happens is that when you have total control, and then when you say everything is going to be like this, and now things are going to go the way we want them to go, and then when they don't, you get a kind of paranoia or anger or sense of victimization. We deserve to be in charge. Here we are. Why aren't people listening to us? Why aren't they doing what they want? And when you have that, as you do, not just in Tennessee, but in other parts of the U.S., where you have a party that is convinced that or some people in the party. Let's not smear everybody. You have some people who are convinced that what they're doing is, blessed by God, that they're acting. They have a higher right to make decisions than anybody else. Then you get this kind of paranoia. So it's almost as if having more power can make you more radical. So instead of becoming, okay, we're in charge of everything, we can be magnanimous, we can let the Democrats, get in a few amendments or make a few points. Instead of acting like that, the opposite happens. We're in charge, things aren't going the way we want, therefore we have to shut down everybody. We have to have total silence. And that's a pattern that I've seen before. I mean, that's not unique to Tennessee. It's not unique in, even in the US. You can see versions of that elsewhere. But that's something that it's important to watch out for, because it's this new level of radicalization. Not just that we won, not that we're in charge, but that we're allowed to make everyone else shut up. This is very radical, and this is quite dangerous for everybody.
I think that's a really important point to make, and I'm glad you closed with it. I have one thing to ask you before I let you go, but I want people to know that they can follow you on Twitter at Applebaum. And it looks like you have a fan on here, because Paros said, "This sounds like a new chapter of Twilight of Democracy. Would love to see a new book focused on this movement in the U.S. Your eye and pen are sharp." So there's a suggestion. But the one thing I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about before I let you go is there's a new article reported from the New York Times saying Trump and allies forge plans to increase presidential power in 2025. I saw you tweeted about that, and I wonder, when you see that, obviously you're not surprised, but how worried should people be about what a second Trump term would look like?
People should be worried. This is a group of people who, again, are convinced that they're right. Some of them because God gave them that right, that power, and who are really quite determined to reshape the United States so that they don't lose, so that they keep power, and so that they can make the kinds of permanent changes to the system that they were unable to make during Trump's first 4 years. So yes, I would be very worried. I mean, I would be, I would put some faith in our courts and in our legislature to fight back, but that there will be people who want to remake the executive in the United States and make it more monarchical and more powerful. I don't doubt. And by the way, whoever is the Republican president, if there was the next Republican president, I think would have a similar agenda.
And thank you for joining us. Thanks for writing the article at Ann Applebaum on Twitter. Follow her, check out her writing. It's really good. And we appreciate that you shined your light on us.
Thank you. And thanks for the time you gave me in Nashville. And thanks for, this today. Much appreciated.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So that's Ann Applebaum. Again, the article is Tennessee a democracy? And wanted to have her on because it's a question we've been asking for a really long time. If you follow us, I don't think you're surprised by that. I believe it's in many ways a theocracy, and not even a secret one. If you went down to the Capitol and you asked pretty much any Republican, who are they there to serve? They will tell you God first. And they try to make the Bible the state book pretty regularly. They just made the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives a government-funded one. Governor Lee's main priority is to expand education privatization in Tennessee, which is his way of steering funds to Christian schools, religious schools. It's at the root of so much of what we see here. And so I do believe we're a theocracy. I think what sets Tennessee apart in a lot of ways is that we have the highest percentage of evangelicals in the entire country. And again, I go to temple. I'm not faulting anybody for their beliefs, their faith, but when it starts to encroach on our government, then we seem to have a problem on our hands. And you can justify a lot of things when you're doing it in the name of God, which I think is what Ann was sort of talking about at the end, and why she was pointing to that Sapicki quote, which was pretty alarming in the leaked audio that we posted a while back. So again, follow her, check out her writing. I see Gapper on here again talking about that. Would you feel this way if it was a supermajority in California with Democrats? I mean, yeah, generally speaking, I think supermajorities are not good. One party rule is not good no matter who's in charge. But there are things that are happening here that are not happening in other states. Other states did not expel legislators for standing up and speaking their mind and fighting for gun rights. Other states do not have the level of voter suppression that we have here. We have the highest percentage of disenfranchised Black people in the entire country, and a Byzantine set of rules for them to re-enfranchise themselves. And we just had a woman get 6 years for voting in Memphis, which was overturned because the DA hid evidence. I mean, this is stuff that's not happening everywhere. And this is stuff we should all be on guard for. And it's what happens in a state where one party is completely out of control. I don't live in California, so I can't tell you exactly what's going on there, but I can tell you what I've seen in our capital for 4 years. And it's not healthy for anybody. They're only governing for a small percentage of our state. And if you say you don't like it, leave. Like, okay. I mean, I could say that about complaints about Biden. If you don't like it, leave the country. Like, where does that get us? We live here. We're trying to express ourselves, present the truth, and give you a chance to form your own opinions about it. And that's really the only thing we're trying to do, period. You may not like what we have to say, and that's fair. I try to talk to people about this stuff. You see me chasing these guys down at the Capitol. It's not because I want to scream at them and yell at their backs. I try to talk to them. They won't talk to me. So tell me what I'm supposed to do when this Republican supermajority unanimously votes to force raped little girls to carry to term an amendment that specifically was going to just allow raped little girls to have abortions. They voted it down unanimously. And then their majority leader walks out, William Lamberth, and I ask him to talk to me and he won't. What am I supposed to do? So yeah, I'm yelling at these guys when they walk away. We don't have discourse here. We don't have normalcy. Mics are being cut all the time. And even if you agree with a lot of what they're doing, you shouldn't be agreeing with how they're doing it. And so just to put a button on this, I just want to present to you a clip that we shared. This is Justin Jones at Netroots Nation this week, actually 2 days ago. And they asked him about the rise of fascism in Tennessee. And here's what he had to say.
Are you seeing the rise of fascism in Tennessee? And how are they trying to enforce that?
My first week there, I'm on the elevator. Senator Jack Johnson makes sure to tell me that you are worthless and you don't belong here. You go to committee, you have Senator Paul Sherrill say, as we're talking about a death penalty bill, we should bring back hanging by a tree. We have members who filed bills to protect Confederate monuments because that was one thing that we finally got removed and they were so angry about it. The statue of KKK Grand Wizard Nathan Bedford Forrest that sat in the most prominent location in our capital. We love to go around the world talking about democracy, but in our state, we don't have democracy. I come from a state that is the birthplace of the Klan. Their heirs run our government. After that experience with Jack Johnson, I started to realize that I'm not here to make friends, but we're here to make change.
Come on.
Even some of my Democratic colleagues, there's a timidity there. Even when I got expelled, they said, go up and apologize, and then maybe they won't expel you. This is what our leadership told us.
Wow.
I said, you know who needs to apologize as a speaker to these families, to these young people.
That's right.
And so one thing I learned when we fight fascism, because it is fascism, it's one party rule, is that we cannot bow down. Tennessee is the birthplace of the Klan, but it's also the birthplace of the Nashville student movement. There will be no civil rights movement without Nashville. We are the city of Diane Nash, of John Lewis, of Bernard Lafayette. We are the city of students who said we're going to continue the freedom rise after the buses were bombed in Anniston. We are the state where that continued. And so we come from this duality of white supremacy, but we're also the state where Ida B. Wells challenged lynchings. We're also the state of Highlander folks, but we're also the state of the Clinton Nine. I mean, we have a powerful legacy, and so we're grounded in that. And that's what we see when we go into the Capitol. And so these fascists, yes, they rule our state. We have one party rule. We don't allow dissent because everyone said, how was it to be expelled? What were you thinking? I said, it was just another day in the Tennessee General Assembly because we were not allowed to speak in committee. We're not recognized on the floor. We're not treated as equal members. I got ruled out of order more than any member had been ruled to that point because when they shut off my microphone, I kept talking. And as you saw, when they shut off our microphone, I pulled out a megaphone out of my pocket.
Yes, sound this.
So that's Justin essentially saying what Ann said in her article. And it's just the truth. He's spitting facts there. I see you guys saying this is BS and, they didn't get expelled for voicing their opinion. It was how they did it. I mean, they got expelled. It's the first time in hundreds of years. There's no justifying that. And what they did was downright heroic because they were willing to sacrifice their seats, not knowing if they were going to be put back. They didn't know how that was going to work, but to show the world what was really going on here. And again, it doesn't matter if you agree with the policy ideas, but the way that it's being implemented in Tennessee is dangerous and dark, and the guardrails are gone. And I don't know how we pull back from that. It seems like it's just going to get more and more extreme. You know, the one thing I always try to end with is a little hope. And what gives me hope is the young people that are showing up at the Capitol still, that are making their voices heard, that are keeping the pressure on, and that are voting more and more. And as young people step into their power, things will change for the better. I know that. And I just hope that we still actually have some semblance of a democracy when that happens. And Tennessee seems to be the guinea pig for those who want exactly the opposite. And that's a scary thing. Thanks for following. We'll see you next time.